All right, let's jump right into it. Today's financial news is, well, it's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, we've got Bitcoin predictions, Apple in court, SpaceX up in the air, and trade wars.
It's a mix, that's for sure. So first up, Bitcoin. It's been a roller coaster. And now Arthur Hayes, BitMEX co-founder, he's saying it could hit $250,000 by the end of the year.
250,000. Wow. That's quite a prediction, especially with the dip we just saw.
Right. He's calling it a correction, not a crash. Thinks it's natural after that big climb we saw.
Makes sense. I mean, going from 20,000 to 110,000, that's a huge jump. Got to cool off sometime.
And his argument, it's interesting. He's basically saying that when governments print money, like they've been doing, it makes people look for something, well, more stable.
Ah, the old flight to safety. But this time, it's digital safety.
Exactly. Bitcoin, it's limited, right? There's only so much. So in a way, it's like digital gold.
And we're seeing others, like Tim Draper, sticking to their 250,000 forecasts too, though he's saying by end of 2025, not this year.
Longer timeline, sure.
Yeah.
And then there's Tom Lee at Fundstrat. He's talking about halving cycles, when the new Bitcoin creation rate gets cut in half.
Right. That makes it even more scarce, which could theoretically drive the price up.
Exactly. Plus, he's mentioning the possibility of governments actually adopting Bitcoin. Now, that would be a game changer.
For sure. But Hayes is saying it'll find support around 70,000. And get this. He's predicting a stock market crash and a financial institution going under before central banks really step in.
Sounds a little ominous, doesn't it?
A bit, yeah. But, I mean, these are just predictions, right? Nobody has a crystal ball.
True, true. As of now, though, Bitcoin's trading around 84,462, up over 3% in the last 24 hours.
So still volatile, but hey, that's crypto for you.
Now, let's switch gears completely. Over in the UK, Apple's in a bit of a legal tussle, and it's all very hush-hush.
Oh, this encryption thing. Yeah, I read something about that. Seems like they're trying to keep it quiet.
Exactly. A secret court hearing. Apparently, the UK government hit Apple with something called a technical capability notice. It's all about accessing encrypted data.
Technical capability notice sounds, well, technical. What does that even mean for Apple, though, practically speaking?
Well, the reports are saying it's basically demanding that Apple weaken its encryption, that end-to-end stuff they're so proud of, especially on their cloud services, including iCloud.
So basically a back door for the government. That's a big deal.
Huge. And get this, they've actually disabled the advanced data protection feature for new iCloud users in the UK already. Quietly, of course.
Wow. And this whole hearing, closed doors, media barred, that doesn't look good, does it?
Not at all. Civil liberties groups are, well, they're not happy, calling the UK's demands unacceptable and disproportionate. They're worried about international agreements like the Cloud Act, the one about cross-border data access being violated.
Right. If one government can force this, what's stopping others? It could set a precedent, a dangerous one.
And there are reports that even former President Trump had concerns about this kind of thing. It's a slippery slope.
For sure. But on the market side, Apple's stock closed up yesterday, 1.82% at $213.49.
But it did dip a bit after hours, and overall, year-to-date, they're down 12.45%. Legal battles, uncertainty, it all plays into it, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Investors, they don't like surprises, especially not when it comes to government intervention.
Okay, enough of earthly concerns. Let's look up. Literally. SpaceX. They just launched a new crew to the International Space Station. Falcon 9 rocket, looking good.
Another successful launch. They're on a roll.
Seems like it. This mission, Crew 10, it's all about bringing back 2 U.S. astronauts, Butch Wilmore and Sunita Williams. They've been up there for 9 months.
9 months? That's a long time away from home.
Right. And there's this whole thing about the launch being, well, rushed a bit, political pressure, maybe.
Oh, really? That wouldn't be the first time space and politics got mixed up.
Nope. The crew, by the way, it's NASA astronauts Anne McClain and Nickel Ayers, Japanese astronaut Takuya Onishi, and Russian cosmonaut Kirill Peskov.
So a truly international crew, that's what the ISS is all about, isn't it?
It is. Though the launch was delayed a bit. Hydraulics issue. Always something, right?
Gotta be extra careful with space travel. No room for error.
And there was that back and forth about Wilmore and Williams' return being delayed, with Elon Musk hinting at, political reasons. But Wilmore himself denied it.
Interesting. Guess we'll never know the full story.
Maybe not. But this mission, it's especially important after Boeing's Starliner, their spacecraft, had to return without a crew. Technical issues.
Right, that was a setback. Shows how challenging spaceflight really is.
No kidding. Crew 10, they're expected to reach the ISS Saturday night, late Eastern time.
Yeah.
And then Wilmore and Williams will head back down on Sunday with 2 other astronauts.
So fingers crossed for a smooth docking and a safe return for everyone.
Absolutely. Now back down to Earth and, well, to some trade tensions. It seems things are getting a little frosty between the U.S. and Canada.
Oh, really? What's going on up north?
Well, Canadian retailers, they're starting to boycott U.S. products. It's starting with things like alcohol, so not essentials yet, but still a statement.
A boycott? Wow, that's serious. What's the reason?
It's a response to those tariffs that the U.S. imposed on Canadian steel and aluminum back during the Trump administration.
Ah, those tariffs. Yeah, they caused a lot of friction. And I remember Trump, he wasn't exactly diplomatic about Canada either.
Not really, no. And now we're seeing the impact. U.S. businesses, some are reporting a loss of Canadian customers, and large Canadian grocery chains like Sobeys and Metro, they're boosting their local product offerings.
Trying to be more self-reliant, huh? Makes sense, given the circumstances.
Sobeys, for example, wants to reduce their U.S. product sales from 12% down to, well, as low as they can get it.
So this is beyond just a symbolic gesture, then. They're making real changes.
Oh, yeah. And remember, Canada already hit back with their own tariffs. Over $20 billion worth of U.S. goods.
Tit for tat. Classic trade war tactic.
Exactly. And then they announced another $30 billion in tariffs earlier in March. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, he called Canada's actions tone deaf. Not pulling any punches there.
Sounds like he's frustrated.
Yeah.
But I guess both sides are feeling the pressure.
Definitely. And it's not just steel and aluminum. There's a lot of tension around U.S. dairy products, too. Some of those tariffs are really high. And then there's Tesla. They've been excluded from rebate programs in British Columbia.
Tesla. That's interesting. Seems like this trade war is spilling over into unexpected areas.
It really is. And it just shows how these things can escalate, impacting businesses and consumers in ways you wouldn't expect. It makes you wonder, how fragile are these international trade relationships?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's easy to take them for granted until something like this happens.
Now, let's talk policy for a minute. A U.S. appeals court just made a ruling, and it's a big one for those diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, DEI.
Ah, yes. I was following that case. A lot of controversy around those programs.
For sure. So the court basically said that the Trump administration's ban on DEI programs in federal agencies and for government contractors, it can be enforced, at least temporarily. They said it's likely constitutional.
So Trump's efforts to dismantle those programs, they're moving forward.
It looks that way, yeah. But here's the thing. 2 of the judges on the panel, they actually disagreed with the substance of the orders. They raised concerns about possible constitutional risks.
So even within the court, there's disagreement. This issue is far from settled then.
Exactly. And this whole thing is part of a bigger lawsuit filed by Baltimore and some other groups. The White House and the Justice Department, they've been quiet so far. No comment.
I wonder what their next move will be.
And this all ties into other stuff that's been happening, like the NIH, National Institutes of Health. They cut funding for certain research grants. Some were focused on transgender issues and DEI.
So a broader push against these types of initiatives, it's creating a lot of uncertainty.
Absolutely. And it's worth remembering that Trump himself, he even linked DEI policies to that plane crash earlier this year. A very controversial statement.
Yeah, that didn't go over well. This whole debate, it's getting pretty heated.
Okay, let's go back to those trade tensions with Canada for a second. Secretary Lutnick, he didn't just comment on the tariffs in general. He specifically called Canada's retaliation tone deaf.
Tone deaf, huh? It's a pretty strong statement. What exactly was he referring to?
And remember, Canada hit back with tariffs on a lot of U.S. goods. We're talking $16 billion worth of steel and aluminum and another $14 billion of other stuff. Tools, computers, even sports equipment.
Sports equipment? Seems a bit random. I guess they were trying to hit a wide range of industries.
Lutnick, though, he defended the U.S. tariffs, said they're needed for national security and to stop what he called dumping countries. Basically, countries that flood the market with cheap goods to undercut competition.
Right, the classic anti-dumping argument. It's often used in trade disputes.
And he specifically questioned the tariffs on things like, well, you guessed it, sports equipment. Like, why target that?
Sounds like he's trying to paint Canada as being unreasonable.
Maybe. But he also brought up Canada's defense spending. Said they're not contributing enough compared to the U.S. and their NATO obligations.
So broadening the criticism beyond just trade. Trying to put more pressure on Canada.
It seems that way. Though Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, he said his meeting with Lutnick was productive. So Maybe there's hope for some kind of resolution.
Let's hope so, because right now the tariffs are still in place on both sides. And as we discussed earlier, Tesla's getting caught in the crossfire too, with those rebates in British Columbia.
It's a mess. And those high tariffs on U.S. dairy, well, that's still a major sticking point.
Hopefully, cooler heads will prevail and they can find a way out of this.
Fingers crossed. Okay, some company-specific news now. Petro-Victory Energy Corp, they're an oil and natural gas company focused on Brazil. They've just hired Alliance Advisors IR to handle their investor relations.
Investor relations, huh? What's the thinking behind that move?
Well, they're trying to improve how they communicate with investors. Public relations, media outreach, social media, all that stuff. Especially as they're pushing for growth in Brazil.
Makes sense. Good communication is crucial, especially when you're trying to attract investors.
The deal is for 15,000 Canadian dollars per month, and it runs until August 31st, 2025. Pretty standard arrangement.
Yeah, sounds about right. So what's their plan for this Brazilian expansion? Anything specific?
Well, they've also announced that they borrowed 400,000 US dollars, unsecured promissory notes from various parties.
Promissory notes. So basically, they're taking on debt to fuel their growth.
Exactly. And the interest rate on these loans, it's 14% per year. Plus, they're giving out bonus warrants to the lenders.
Warrants, those are like options to buy stock at a certain price, right?
Yep. So it's a way to incentivize the lenders, give them a potential upside.
Interesting. But isn't there something specific about these loans, some regulatory issue?
Yes. These loans and the warrants, they're considered related party transactions under Canadian rules, which means they have to disclose a lot of details to make sure everything's above board.
Right. Transparency is key, especially when dealing with insiders. Don't want any funny business.
Exactly. And they're relying on some exemptions because they're listed on the TSX Venture Exchange, and the deal's value is under 25% of their market cap.
So they're staying within the rules, but still, investors will want to keep an eye on this.
For sure. Now let's talk about potential legal trouble. The law firm Kirby McInerney LLP, they're investigating Zynex Inc. That's a medical device company.
Zynex, what are they being investigated for?
Well, it all started when they released their fourth quarter and full year results for 2024. They had a pretty big revenue shortfall.
A revenue shortfall? That's never good. What was the reason?
They blamed it on slow payments from certain payers. But the big issue, it's TRICARE, the healthcare program for the military and their families.
Right, TRICARE. That's a huge pair. What's going on with them?
Well, they've temporarily suspended payments to Zynex. They're reviewing past claims. And TRICARE, it makes up a big chunk of Zynex's revenue. 20 to 25%, they say.
Wow, no wonder their stock took a hit. 51% drop. Investors are running for the hills.
And that's exactly why the law firm is investigating. They're looking into possible violations of federal securities laws, or maybe even other unlawful practices.
So they're trying to see if Zynex misled investors or did something shady.
Basically, yeah. This could get messy.
Definitely one to watch. Okay, so we've had Bitcoin, court battles, trade wars, investigations. Any good news today?
Well, let's end on a positive note. Let's talk about a stock that's been doing really well. Freeport-McMoRan. They're in the mining industry.
Freeport. I know that name. They've been around for a while.
They have. And over the past 5 years, their stock has been a star performer. They've had an average annual return of 43.07%. That's 25.72% better than the overall market.
Wow, that's impressive. Consistent growth like that, it's what every investor dreams of.
Right. Their market cap is now over $55 billion. And get this, if you had invested $1,000 in their stock 5 years ago, it would be worth over $6,200 today.
The power of compounding. It's a beautiful thing when it works in your favor.
Absolutely. So even with all the ups and downs, there's still opportunities out there for long-term investors.
For sure. It's all about finding those solid companies and holding on for the ride.
And on that note, we've reached the end of today's financial news roundup. We covered a lot, from Bitcoin's potential to Apple's legal fight, SpaceX's launch, trade tensions, policy shifts, and even a company's impressive stock performance.
It was a whirlwind, that's for sure. Lots to think about.
It always is. As you digest all this, think about how these developments might affect your own financial decisions. Maybe do some more research into crypto or tech regulation or the complexities of global trade.
It's a complex world out there, and staying informed is more important than ever.
Absolutely. In a world where financial news is constant, understanding the forces at play and the potential ripple effects, it's key to making smart choices. So what stood out to you today? What connections did you find most interesting?